Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 6th episode of Conatus Views. I'm here today with the fantastic journalist, Tara Abhasakun. Tara, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me. So I'm Tara Abhasakun. I'm a journalist, and I mostly write about human rights in the Middle East. Right now, I live in Bangkok, Thailand. Most of my work revolves around religious persecution of minorities in the Middle East, the Yazidis, for example. I write about women's rights, too.
Yeah, really glad to have you on, Tara. So today we're going to be talking about the group which motivated the attacks in Toronto recently, the Incels. Tara, would you like to explain how you gained some insights into this group?
Well, right. So I heard about this attack, and as someone who researches Islamism, I instantly looked up, okay, who is this guy, Alec Minassian, and what was his motive? And then this is where I found, Alex Minassian was part of a group called Incel. So I'm kind of, what's that? I look up this group Incel, and it literally says to me on the websites, involuntarily celibate. That's what they are called. Essentially, Incel is a group of men who just can't find women who want to have sex with them. I know this sounds so silly and so simplistic, but that is literally what this is. It's a movement of men who are sexually frustrated and lonely. A lot of them tend to be very nerdy. They're interested in anime. So that's what this is. Anyway, the story is I put up a tweet about it. I said, F incel, F misogyny. And now, as a feminist on social media, it should be said, I'm used to online sexual abuse. I've gotten people, both Islamists and the far right calling me a slut or saying I shouldn't complain about getting groped. I get abuse all the time. Now, but usually it's maybe one person, okay? One person just says something stupid. Other people tell them to shut up. It's no big deal. Just one comment per tweet. I looked back at my Twitter notifications 20 minutes later, and I had gotten about 53 replies to me. It's still growing, by the way. I now have like almost 200 of these incel replies calling me a roasty, which, and we'll talk about that later, but they're basically calling me a slut because I said F incel, F misogyny. And so what really surprised me about this is, this movement is actually very popular. It's not just, it doesn't appear to be that fringe. It appears, I'm getting hundreds of these comments, unlike with the far right and Islamists. So I'm very shocked at how popular this movement actually is.
Yeah, it's certainly something that seems to have sort of grown up under the radar. So far, they seem to have mainly confined themselves to their own little groups and forums online. And now we're starting to see the physical manifestation of these beliefs, if you like. This obviously isn't the first time that we've had these sort of sexually frustrated males launching large-scale attacks on the general population. But certainly the development of an actual ideology around this is new and disturbing. So one of the things that's particularly notable about this group is the sheer level of victim mentality.
Yes, so victim mentality is just a key thing that I noticed in Backlash to me. So and this is really the language they use. Many people have said to me, these men are already marginalized. Why are you continuing to marginalize them? You're making the situation worse. So let me recap. By standing up for myself and saying incels use this disgusting language against women, and it's wrong, and by saying F misogyny, I am supposedly marginalizing them. I'm a woman here, and I mean, if you want my Oppression Olympics, I'm a woman of color too. I am supposedly oppressing men who can't get laid. Men who can't get laid are now a marginalized and oppressed group. Now, what I can't help but notice about this is this victim mentality is similar to ISIS, I think, and it's similar to Islamists. It's, you know, this language surrounding disenfranchised young men. So I guess I want to know, Dan, do you agree with me? Do you think it's fair to say that the victim mentality about poor young men is actually similar to ISIS types?
Yeah, I think that in all of these extremist groups, you'll find the same kind of victim mentality. I mean, even the Nazis at the height of their power believed that Germany was beset by enemies, that the Jews were conspiring to destroy Germany, and so on and so on. I think feeling victimized is a key fundamental element which drives all of these groups, and I think it's a three-stage process. First of all, there has to be some kind of issue that these people are facing, whether it's real or imagined. So for these groups, it's that they feel that not having sex deprives them of some kind of fundamental right, which is totally ludicrous, of course. But there are lots of people who feel alienated, feel isolated. But especially with women, they tend to internalize that. They say, well, look, this is a fault that I have. For a lot of people, they suffer like that in perpetuity, but also understanding the things that you might be doing wrong is probably the best way of overcoming the obstacles that you face in life, figuring out the approach that you need to take to deal with these issues. But if you are unwilling to engage in self-reflection, to engage in self-improvement, then the obvious logical step beyond that is to blame other people for your problems, blame all of society, that feel like they are not giving you the thing that you deserve. And so this is the second step, this victim mentality. And if it stopped there, it still wouldn't be a huge problem for the rest of the society. People would just simply be depressed, they would sulk, they would console each other maybe. But it's the third step which is the real danger, is it's going from feeling like a victim, because of course if you feel like a victim, you're powerless, you're helpless, you're being battered about by a storm. It's going from that sense of victim to then trying to stop being a victim, which, if you'd done that in the initial first stage, you would be engaging in self-improvement. But at this point, the way that you stop being a victim is by taking out your feelings on other people, by lashing out, by causing other people pain. And this is the point at which the incel community seems to have reached at this moment in time, this sort of vicious explosion of these internal stresses.
Right. So I guess that we could say that is similar to ISIS. It's just that ISIS actually have a theological component to it, and they have some holy texts that can be used to back them up. Whereas with Incel, and from my understanding so far, it appears to be more or less secular. However, I do notice that quite a few incels seem to also be Christian fundamentalists. It's just that this kind of incel ideology is not explicitly Christianic.
Well, there's definitely it seems like there's some overlap there. It's interesting because, of course, messages of Christianity are ones of sort of self-denial, restraint, compassion, so on. But I think what they're drawing from Christianity is the sort of sexual restrictions, that the rules about no sex before marriage, opposition to homosexuality, and so on. And this is a common feature in a lot of religions, including Islam. And this is a core element of religious control, is channeling the sexual frustration into behaviors which suit your objectives.
it's good that you brought that up, because this one guy who I've kind of been messaging back and forth, just a little background, one person, I won't even say the name of his Twitter account, but he has told me I am an incel and I want to leave it. Like, he realizes that it's wrong. He's told me before that incels who end up getting girlfriends have been shunned by the community. So it's like you kind of make friends because you're all victims, you're all suffering. And it's weird because it's as if there's no end goal, because they don't want to get out of the suffering. Do you see what I mean? So once someone does get it, it's not like, oh, let's try to all get us all girlfriends. Once someone did get a girlfriend, they all shunned him and wouldn't be friends with him anymore. So I guess I kind of don't understand, like, okay, what's the point? If you're complaining on and on about not having sex, but then you shun someone who does, you know?
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing, because this is what makes the incel ideology sort of the culmination of some of these various sects of misogyny, which we've seen before, is they've convinced themselves that they are utterly, totally incapable of connecting with a female human being. There is absolutely no chance that anyone will ever sort of love them, basically. And this is funny because as a sort of a kind of a nerdy guy myself, I felt lonely, you know, I felt isolated. But I have actually had something of a relationship before, you know, and just that is enough to make me into, you know, I've had people that I've sort of known before, who have been this sort of this nerdy, lonely guy mentality. In their eyes, I'm like I'm someone who's made it because I have previously had a relationship, and that is totally, you know, it's the level of extremity present in their mindset.
Actually, I have a bit of a comment about that. In fact, because maybe you can clue me in then, because I'll admit I'm not really in nerd culture. I mean, I consider myself a nerd in other ways, but I'm not in with, you know, video game culture and gamer culture. I have heard before that within gaming culture and nerd culture, there's this thing among nerd girls that if someone has a boyfriend that she's happy with, then suddenly you're no longer a real nerd anymore because you've been successful in your love life. There's this whole thing about how, like, nerds are part of their identity even is not getting the person that they want. Like, it's not getting with a person, and especially not getting with the person who they deep down really want to be with, because then suddenly that makes them like too cool or too happy. So I guess what you're saying does seem to confirm, correct me that I'm wrong, that a part of this actually comes from nerd culture.
Yeah,
and then combined with
definitely. Well, this is the problem, and this is why I would never actually call myself a nerd, geek, etc. Because this is my problem with a lot of identity politics as a whole, is the identity that you are clinging onto is something that was imposed upon you by people who don't like you, by people who want to discriminate against you. So the very idea of being a nerd, a geek, is someone who he's ostracized, who is isolated, and this is the identity that people build themselves around, and that is concerning in itself. And as you say, you get this sort of this mentality where if you are successful, you are no longer one of us. People pulling each other down.
Yeah, and I think because you brought up identity politics in general, and I think that's a great point. So once you have an identity, like an official identity, like you are this, the only way that you can stay specifically that is there's a set of rules, because the identity or the thing that you are or whatever comes with a whole package. And so I guess on a deeper level, and we won't even go into all that right now, but it does bring up identity politics. And so yeah,
definitely. And I'm planning to do some videos on this of my own at some point, so do stay tuned to my channel if you want to hear that.
So I think the next thing that I want to bring up is the language that incels use a few of you who have been keeping up with it have probably know what a roasty is right now. I don't even want to get into the details of it because it's such a gross and vulgar way of thinking about women. But the thing about incels language is I think it's important because it provides us with a window into their way of thinking. So there's the term roasty, but there's also this thing of chads and versus Stacys. So a chad is essentially a guy who is successful at getting sex, a guy who girls want to have sex with, basically just an attractive man. And it's funny, they have like Chad is the white version, but then they have a black version of Chad, which is a Tyrone. So it just means a successful, hot black guy. Apparently they have like a black version and white version. So it's a bit like of a racialized thing. But then, so for girls, they have a Stacy and then they have a Roasty. Now what's interesting is both Stacys and Roasties have had sex. So from what I understand, maybe I'm wrong, but Stacy is not a virgin. For some reason, Stacys have a positive connotation, whereas if you're a roasty, that's just the worst thing you can be as a woman, is a roasty. So it sounds so silly, but I'm trying to understand all this. So what is with this whole concept of a Stacy? What do you think, Dan?
Well, it's interesting because this ties into misogyny as a whole, and misogyny is particularly distinct in all forms of prejudice because if you are a heterosexual man, women are still the sort of the objects of your affection, your desire, and yet you may be filled with this misogyny. So you are always faced with this kind of duality. So I think the Stacy in this case represents the object of desire for the incels. So the Stacy may have done wrong, but in their eyes, Stacy represents what they could have if only they were a Chad instead, if only they weren't an incel. So she has to have these positive qualities in order for the incels to desire her. Whereas the Roasty, I think, is in their minds someone who's essentially been ruined. So the Stacy must have some positive qualities in order for the incel to see her as an object of desire. They have to desire a woman because of their desire for sex. And this is something that runs through all of misogyny, is this dichotomy. And so what makes incels really distinct from other kinds of misogynist is a complete inability to understand how to interact with women, essentially. Because I've seen a lot of misogynist groups, men who have a real hatred for women, and this is something that you see all over society, is actually men with very little respect for women. But in order to maintain their personal relationships with women, they have to put on a facade of respect. The incels, on the other hand, are either incapable or unwilling of doing that. So you see, the so-called nice guys are somewhere in between your average misogynist and the incels, in that they think they understand how to behave towards women, and yet they're frustrated at their continual failure. So a nice guy believes they understand how they should treat a woman, and yet fail to achieve the sex which is the object of their desire, rather than actually starting off from a position of treating everybody with respect and going from there. So you can see how the incel mentality is not isolated from other elements of society. It is not something totally new and distinct. It is simply, if you like, the most extreme logical combination of these other misogynist groups which we've already come across.
Well, that actually brings me to my next talking point, and I think that this is kind of the most important thing to take away from our conversation. So anyone who reads Conatus News, anyone who keeps up with our work, I think kind of knows that there are these three groups that we're sort of up against. We know that there's the far right wing, there's the Islamists, and there's the regressive left. And you know, our readers kind of know that we kind of position ourselves like against all these bad forces. The common thread, or a common thread, I think, in all of these groups is misogyny. With the Islamists, it's raping Yazidis. With the far right wing, it's stay in the kitchen, woman. And then with the regressive left, even, it's the recent shutting down of radical feminists in the name of the new gender discourse. It's shutting down and, you know, harassing and intimidating radical feminists. So I guess maybe I want to ask you, what is it about misogyny that sort of seems to be this very strong, I think it's kind of like a driving factor within negative ideas, within bad ideas?
I think I touched on it earlier, is the sexual repression is an incredibly useful tool in controlling people. And misogyny is deeply rooted throughout our society. And so actually, men who are already feeling angry and frustrated towards women will actually be more attracted to an ideology the more it enables them to express that hatred towards women. If the ideology presents a suitable target, they will gravitate towards it. It's the same with any ideology, is people will be attracted to the means rather than the ends, because the means allows them to behave in the ways that they already wanted to. Misogyny is something which is sort of widespread throughout society in different forms. And the reason that people don't always recognize this is because it comes in different forms, in subtle forms and in obvious forms. And it goes back, it's possibly the oldest form of prejudice there is, the oldest form of discrimination, the oldest form of social hierarchy. So it's something that is deeply ingrained across the world. And it's something which motivates men in particular. It's unfortunately, a lot of political activity is motivated on the basis of misogyny, in my view.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a great point.
So when all of this stuff about incels came out recently, I was surprised because I just happened to be reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and the motives and behavior of Frankenstein's monster in the book is incredibly similar to the justification instrumentality of incels. And I recommend anyone who wants to understand the incels without actually having to wade through any of their filth is to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because the incels see themselves as versions of Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein's monster is a being which claims to be possessed of compassion, respect, understanding. All he wants is to be understood, to connect with human beings, and yet at every turn he is met by fear, revulsion, and hatred. And so he almost immediately turns from wanting to be accepted into this kind of violent revenge, attacking everyone, innocent people, women and children in particular. And you can see how the incels wrongly believe themselves to, through no fault of their own, be utterly isolated from the rest of society, and have turned this feeling of isolation into a pure rage, and they want to lash out at everybody else for their own inadequacies. And the thing I would say to incels, the thing I would say to people who are lonely and frustrated is, okay, maybe society dealt you a bad hand, but you are not irredeemable you are not incapable of self-improvement. If you want other people to respect you, if you want other people to love you and appreciate you, there are things that you can do to yourself which will help you achieve those ends. Is learning how to be a better person for the sake of it, not for the sake of making somebody else love you, because you can't make someone else love you. You have to love yourself. You have to look after yourself. You have to listen to other people, understand their problems, their issues, develop some empathy. Constantly expecting other people to be sympathetic, to be empathetic towards you, and having absolutely no sympathy and empathy towards other people is a totally dead-end mentality. It's not going to get you anywhere. If you want to cure your loneliness and isolation, you have to actually figure out how to interact with other people, and that comes with respecting other people for their own sake, not just simply looking at other people in terms of what you can get out of them.
I think that's such a brilliant psychoanalysis. I guess I wish I had something as intellectual to say to incels. I guess right now I'm a little too pissed off to say something on that intellectual of a note. So thank you, Dan.
Well, this is the thing. When it comes to even people I absolutely despise, I always think it's best to try and understand them, try and see their perspective. Yes, hate them if you have to, and there are certainly many people which I absolutely despise, but figure out how you can turn them from these sort of totally worthless, horrible people into something slightly less horrible. And the thing is, you are never obligated to do that. It's never on you to convert someone from a demon into a responsible person, and nobody should feel like it's up to them. Nobody should take on the burden of curing these people. They have to do it for themselves. You have to balance compassion with steely resolve, in my view, because I believe that people, and especially these kind of lonely groups like incels, they will desperately try and use compassion and sympathy. This is prevalent within many misogynists. Is they will try and make women feel sorry for them, and in that way, they will try and oblige those women to cater to them, and people will end up in relationships with men that they are virtually babying out of sympathy. And if we want to operate in society, we have to understand our rights and responsibilities, and we are not responsible for the psychological problems of other people. We are not responsible for dragging people off their feet. I mean, yes, as a society should seek to help every member of society become a productive member of that society. Society should not let people fall, but individuals within that society should never bear the burden of that responsibility, because it's that burden which is the product of a lot of abuse in our modern society.
Right. I guess on that note, I guess the way that I would think of that for my situation is I want absolutely no true engagement with all of the incels who have literally called me roasty, which again means slut, and have told me come back with my tits showing. However, if more of them were like the guy who told me, like, okay, I want to get out, but I don't know if I can do this, and they privately messaged me saying that, I think that I would reach out and give them the advice that you gave.
And this is the thing, because as I say, as someone who has been lonely, has felt ostracized, I remember one moment, when I was sort of 15 or so, feeling some particular bad vibes towards women as a whole, and I stopped myself and thought, wait, no, that's not right. You're blaming other people. You're mistaking some particular interactions you've had for a group as a whole, and I corrected that. So you have to understand that the negative feelings that you're experiencing are a product of your own mentality and not a reflection of the world as a whole. And once you do that, once you realize that you are the problem, then you can go on to addressing those problems. But until you're willing to admit to your own faults, then you are essentially unsavable.
Yeah. Okay.
So that just about covers it for today. Thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully you found this episode interesting and useful. Thank you so much, Tara, for joining us. It's been really great to have you on.
Thank you for having me on. I'm so glad this is my first time being on, even though I'm with the team. So thank you. Thanks to everyone who watched.
Been looking forward to having you on.
Thank you, Dan.
And if you
I'm looking forward to being here.
If you like this episode, do leave a like. Subscribe if you want to see more from this channel. And if you have anything to say, do leave a comment underneath. Hopefully you'll join us next time. And it's goodbye from me.
And bye from me.